All right, hello and welcome back to Brothas-in-law. I'm Mike Bradley. I'm here with my co-host Corey Taylor, talking about a little bit about defunding the police and what that looks like, what some people may think that actually is. How's it going, Corey?
Good, man. I can't complain. How about yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. So we're getting a lot of talk about you hearing about police officers, police departments need to be funded. You got a lot of cities out here trying to promote defunding their police. I'm against defunding the police because the number one thing I can think off the top of my head is training. You need money to train, okay? And everybody wants their police department to be highly successful, and they want them to be well trained. Well, it costs money to be well trained. And that's the first thing that I see that takes a hit in police departments when you talk about defunding the police department. When this first came out, I get the sense that people were talking about defunding the police in a spirit of based on what's been going on with these shootings and things that people are getting killed that folks didn't agree with. I get the feeling that the defunding the police was their way of quote unquote punishing the police. That's how it came across to me. Now I understand that a lot of people got their own ideas of what defunding the police looks like, and whether or not we've heard the incidents where they say defunding the police in the sense of let's take all the money that we are putting in our police department, that is what we believe is overboard, and putting that money in other things that would be more helpful to the community, more community resources. I'm against that. I'm against the defunding the police because you need your police department. The police department ain't going anywhere. As much as people would like to think that their community can police themselves, they are sadly mistaken. What you think about that?
No, I totally agree with you. I'm totally against defunding the police too. I think, we have to understand how important policing is. If you do not have policing, you cannot maintain one, good order and discipline, and you have no civility. You have total anarchy, right? Because at that point, just imagine a city, a state without any police or very minimal policing. I mean, take a look at what's going around from New York all the way to California. Everybody's crime rate numbers are tripled than what they were from last year because a lot of this defunding has taken effect in some of these cities. And my major concern with all of this is who's going to be impacted by this the most. And I think, we're not thinking of that. Politicians are screaming this, taking the money, but the citizens, you have to look at who's really going to be impacted by this before we start, going off and saying, yeah, we need to take money from them. You want more training, like you said, well, it takes money, right? You just said that, Mike. It takes money to fund these programs. And then some of these other programs that they're shutting down that cost money, especially when it comes to special investigative units that really help out in crime prevention, because that's what policing is. It's about crime prevention to help stop further crimes from happening. And when you start taking those programs away, and a lot of those programs usually affect the lower income neighborhoods, particularly Black and brown. So when you start taking those programs away, crime rate goes up. So it makes no sense to defund the police. And these are politicians who don't have to live in those neighborhoods when those crime rates spike up through the roof, right? They go home to their little gated communities with security, right? Their personal security. So they don't have to worry about crime, but we do. So I don't think it's a good idea. I think there are other ways we could improve policing, but taking money away and shutting down precincts, especially in hard-hit neighborhoods, is not the way.
I agree. And like you said, the police are the community. The police are
Yeah.
your community. You see what I'm saying? So people got to realize that, when you talk about defunding the police, you are talking about defunding services for the community. You are talking about defunding what police can do for the community. You're defunding what kind of officers, what kind of training your officers are going to be getting to deal with things within the community. So in the bigger picture of things, taking money away from police is taking money away from the community itself, in a sense,
Yeah.
because you're taking services away. Um, Especially in these times when you have a lot of police turnover and things like that. You might have less officers on the street in your neighborhood, or you might have less interaction or less enforcement efforts that can be taken on crime prevention, like you said, because we just don't have the funding to staff events. Uh, and when officers are responding to these calls for services, they don't have the proper training because you took the funding away from the training that they should receive. I think a lot of people need to understand that when you say defund the police, you're really hurting the community in a sense, because the community is the ones that benefit from the training of the police. That's that community's police department. That police department belongs to the community. Okay. When the community needs A, B, C, or D, the police department, when they call the police department, they expect a certain amount of service. You know what I'm saying? Well, if you start pulling money away from your police department, well, you're going to start attacking the services that you have, that you are going to need at some point. The answer is not less police officers on the street. I think the answer is always and will always be more police officers on the street.
Right, I agree. I think you'd have to have more police in certain areas, high crime areas, and let's be honest, a lot of your high crime areas are in low income neighborhoods, specifically Black and Latino. So you're going to need more police in those areas. And then when you and we'll get into this in a second. We'll talk about the HR 128, which is the George Floyd police reform bill. But like you just said, Mike, the police department or police precincts are part of the neighborhoods, right? So again, I encourage people to get out there and know your local police precincts and know the officers that work in those areas and get to know them. It's about building relationships and knowing where and who you need to voice your concerns to if you have an issue about policing. And the end result is always, yes, peaceful protest when it's warranted, and not to go out here and destroy your own neighborhoods that you live in, right? Because you got to look at the repercussions of that, right? The people that live in those communities really going to suffer because now they don't have no stores to go to, and the police aren't going to be able to respond to any break-ins or any type of call to services. So we have to look at those things. I was on a podcast over the weekend on Sunday and talking to two gentlemen who want to defund the police, and it's crazy because I kind of got a little heated in it because I didn't snap at him. I held my tongue, but I pretty much told him, I said, man, you have to stop listening to these politicians. I said, because you sound just like them. You're yelling for this defund the police, but you have no idea what the answer to the problem is. All you're saying is defund the police, defund the police. We don't need them. We don't need them. Okay, so what do you need? Who's going to police? Right? And he said, well, he believes that citizens should do the policing. I said, okay. The other gentleman that was on there with me, Mr. Eric Muldrow, says, okay, well, who's going to hold them accountable? Right? So somebody's still going to need to be held accountable to policing, right? Your neighborhood watch can't hold court for the neighborhood. Somebody's still going to have to make the decision, well, what type of punishment that person's going to receive because they didn't cut their grass, right? Sort of like homeowner associations, right? somebody's still gonna have to be in the upper echelon calling the shots, and then the community has to come together and say, okay, what's a good law for that community? And then, when those laws are broken, who's holding them responsible, accountable for their actions, right? So I think they have unrealistic views of really how policing works.
I agree. I agree totally. I think you have people out there who maybe in their personal lives they haven't needed police, or maybe they don't live like you said. The politicians talk about certain things, but like maybe they don't live in areas where you have a lot of police contact because maybe it's a low crime area or something like that, and you don't have a lot of police in your particular neighborhood. Maybe those are the people that are in those neighborhoods that are saying defund the police and we don't need them. Maybe because they personally have never had them. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case or not, right? But the bottom line is, you're just taking money away from your community service, basically, which is the police. It's a community service, right? You're asking for bigger problems. You already see now across the country where departments are cutting back on the kinds of services that they are providing. We're no longer responding to what they call cold theft reports where there's no suspects, or we're no longer responding to harassing phone call complaints, or we're no longer responding to graffiti reports where there's no suspect involved. Or you have a lot of them cutting back on the amount of officers on the street because they're losing officers and they can't afford to staff the department to keep them up to the staffing level that they need to have. So, you already can start to see some problems coming up along the whole defund the police thing that's going on.
And what really doesn't make sense to me, Mike, is how they want to defund the police, and in the same breath, they want to lighten a lot of prison sentences for violent criminals. They want to shut down some of these prisons and let a lot of these felons and murderers and rapists back out on the streets. I think, well, how is that going to work? You actually think they're going to be rehabilitated and learn their lessons and go back out and be productive citizens? No. They're going to be right back in their neighborhoods doing the exact same thing they did before. Why? Because now they know that there's less police officers. They've gotten, some cities throughout the country have gotten locks on their laws. In other words, these criminals know now, especially in New York, that they'll be out in a couple hours. They have the no bail or bonds. So they go in, they get processed, they get a court date, and they get released. And then right back out on the street, committing crimes again, right? And this is all because if you want to defund the police and you don't hire the police officers to keep running after these same people, right? And these criminals know it. So who, again, just like they want to do away and stricter gun laws and all that stuff, criminals don't obey your laws. My fellow Americans, let me say it again. Criminals do not obey your laws. Point blank. That's why they're criminals. That's why we have laws, because they're criminals. So we don't have to keep dealing with this, right? You keep breaking the law, you need to go to jail. And I don't care how, it doesn't matter. Whatever the sentence is, you can stay behind in jail, right? We can't have anarchy out here. And that's what you keep listening to these politicians. This is the cliff they're going to lead you over. And we can't have that. We have to have some type of good order and discipline. And we maintain that by having good policing. As Mike and I have said before, yes, we know that there are bad police officers. We know that. And yes, we ought to be held to a higher standard than any profession out here. Why? Because police has the power. Police officers have the power to take your freedom away from you, and also if situation warrants to use deadly force. right? So yes, police officers are held to a higher standard. You can try to come up with the most perfect system in the world. There's always going to be that one that gets through that crack and messes it up. But we have to stay on top, but we have to do our jobs, keep weeding these folks out, and keep up with the training. But to just cancel out policing as a whole, that you just don't want no more policing and you don't have a solution to it. Okay, there's an article I was reading a couple weeks ago where they were saying that, police officers don't need to handle traffic stops anymore. Okay, guys speeding 80 miles an hour down the road. This little traffic enforcement person tries to stop them and finds out this guy just robbed somebody or murdered somebody. Now, what do they do? Because they're not going to be armed. So what are they going to do? How are they going to be protected? Who gets into that pursuit to go after that guy now that just murdered somebody and running away or just robbed a bank or a store? What does this whole defund look like? Leave us a comment below if you know what this whole defunding the police is supposed to look like. Please share your response on what it is, because nobody has a plan. Nobody knows what that looks like. And I tell you what it looks like. It looks like total anarchy. It's total chaos. You're going to have your chop and your chaz like you have up there in Washington State and then over in, and I think in Portland, right? It's still going on, folks. Check it out on the web. Don't listen to your local media and Fox and CNN, and they're not talking about it, but they're still, chop and chaz are still in effect in these cities, in Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, causing anarchy. And the police are getting burnt out in Portland. They're having a high turnover rate. These guys are getting burnt out, and I don't blame them. I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day, and he was like, "Man, Corey, you ever think about going back?" I didn't know. You couldn't pay me enough to go back. As much as I love policing and as much as I love interacting with the public, you couldn't pay me enough to go back, because these young folks, it's different. I mean, there's no respect for law enforcement.
The job has definitely become more dangerous. It's almost like there's a war on police in some places, not all places. There are still some places that support the police, but there are other elements of the community throughout the country that strongly are against police and policing and what police represents. There was a time in history where, particularly Black folks, police departments were, they had racist practices. We're not arguing that either. You see what I'm saying? No. Yeah, we know there was a time. But today, in these times and ages, the police is something that is definitely needed. And it's definitely by far much better than it was back in the history days of, where you had cops pulling you over, pulling the Black guy out of the car and beating them for no reason. You see what I'm saying? You ain't seeing that today. As much as the media wants you to believe that just ain't happening today. Okay.
No.
But I think another thing is I think most people don't even understand what the job of police is. What exactly are they to do? I think most of them think that they just pull people over for stop sign violations and that's it, give them tickets and they respond when you call them and that's it. They don't understand the deeper, bigger picture of what policing actually is. And policing is finding crime, handling the crime, handling criminals, and arresting people when they need to be arrested, in a nutshell. You see what I'm saying? But to do that involves a whole lot of things, starting with just your patrol officer that you see on the streets. He's making stops. The criminals aren't just going to come up to police and say, here I am. I'm a criminal, so here, you can go and arrest me. You see, they're not going to do that. Cops' jobs have to go out and they have to find police. You see what I'm saying? To do that, they have to make contacts with the public. They have to make traffic. They have to make consensual contacts. They have to find and investigate people when they make those contacts. They have to find and investigate them. Do these people have warrants? Are they up to no good? Are they committing a crime? Are they about to commit a crime? Are they committing a crime, or did they just commit a crime? You see what I'm saying? Police
Mm-hmm.
have to use all kinds of investigative techniques to find those things out. So it's not just police out there doing traffic enforcement or small things like that you see stereotypically on television that you see cops do. Every day a cop is out there trying to find crime or find criminals through public contact with the citizens. You see what I'm saying? If you are
Right.
patrolling a high crime neighborhood, well, you're going to make a whole lot more contacts because you're trying to find the high crime people. You see, for lack of better words, you're trying to find those criminals and get them off the street so that you can make an impact in the amount of crime that's in that particular area. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
People don't understand that. People don't think they understand that. So when you defund the police, you essentially are changing the kind of policing you're going to be getting in your community, whether you think you need it or not. That's your fault if you don't think you need it. But every community needs policing, and it doesn't make sense to take away from the quality of the policing that you receive.
Right. And you're right, because again, like we had said a few minutes ago, who suffers from this? The people do. And look what's going on in Minneapolis, right? There was an article out today, I think it was today or yesterday, today, about how a Minneapolis couple is suing the city
I saw it.
and the mayor for
Mm-hmm.
failing to protect the streets, and they're saying we're under siege, right? Well, y'all voted to defund the police there, and this is what you get, right? And to our followers, our viewers, like, wake up to this. You need to wake up to this. The news media is not going to report this stuff to you. These families are suffering up there, and not only just in Minneapolis, but throughout the United States, where crime rate is shooting through the roof, right? They're not going to tell you, oh yeah, this is the effects. They're not even telling you how it's working with these precincts being shut down, the money being taken away. These things are happening, and they're going to get worse as these politicians keep crying for defunding the police. You're not going to have civility. You're going to have total anarchy, and it's going to get to the point where people then are now just going to take law into their own hands, because police are going to be spread out thin, right? I mean, their 8, 10, 11, 12-hour shift is going to be call to call to call, and they're going to get burnt out every day, and they're going to get burnt out. And then when they get burnt out, that's when you start making stupid mistakes and getting themselves hurt and becoming complacent, right? So, it's not going to work. I don't know how else to drive that nail home to everyone that, it's not that. And then when you got to look at the age group, I think our age group, maybe a little younger, starting probably maybe 40 and up, I think are in that range of, hey, no, we need police. It's the younger kids, these new millennials out here just spewing stuff. And you need to come into reality here. You need law enforcement, because there's pure evil out there that we need to protect our citizens. That's the job of law enforcement, to protect and serve.
Yeah, protect and serve, find crime, find criminals, and do what is needed to get them off the street. You see what I'm saying?
So
now that being said, we do understand that there may be some problems within the criminal justice system from top to bottom, from the courts down to the police departments, as far as, and we could talk about that. I mean, like I said, I've always said we are definitely not against police reform. We're not against improving something that needs to be improved or fixing
correct.
something that needs to be fixed. But if it's something that, it is what it is, and there's no, either you're going to continue to do it or you're not, or you're going to cut it out altogether. You see what I'm saying? There's always going to be some things that the community just won't like. You see what I'm saying? People don't like their freedoms taken from them. People don't like to be searched. They don't like to be arrested. They don't like to be, told what to do and what they can't do. And I understand that. You're always going to have things within policing that people are not going to like. But if it is broken, okay, it definitely needs to be fixed. The communities have to understand, they have to make up their mind, I think, what is it that they want from their police department? What kind of officers do you want on the street? Do you want a highly trained officer on the street, or do you want an officer that's got some training, and not as much as the next city over, or something like that? You got to look at that when you talk about taking money away. Do you want your officer to be well equipped when they are on the street dealing with calls for service, or do you only want them to have some equipment but not all? Body cams cost a lot of money for a department to have.
I guess one thing, Mike, is I think a lot of people don't want the police to look so militarized.
And I understand that. I understand that too, to a degree, but you got to understand the police is authoritarian organization. You know what I'm saying? They are enforcers. They enforce the law. So you can't always wear roses and flowers and roses to look nice, more approachable. It's all about the individual person that's wearing what they're wearing and using what they're using. And I understand that. There's some things though that are simply going to look militaristic. For instance, we used to have available to us on patrol, we used to have what we call back shields. They're basically shields that when you're going into a building or something with a possibly armed suspect, there's some level of protection for the officers. Well, it's going to look militaristic. You call a SWAT truck out. SWAT truck looks militaristic. SWAT is needed. The truck is needed for them to do what they do. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Because you understand that the level of the threat that they're going into, right? You can't go to an old Crown Vic to a drug house, do a drug bust, and they got AK-47s, M4s, and all kind of other artillery in there, armor piercing rounds. I mean, in the late 80s and into the early 90s, that was a real big thing with the armor piercing rounds. So, when police go do these things, they have to match that level of threat and exceed that level of threat as far as protection goes, right? Because again, the officer wants to go home too. I'm not gonna roll up and I know you can't. I'm not gonna gunfight and be outgunned. And again, you're criminals who don't abide by these laws, and they are not allowed to have these semi-automatic weapons. And who knows what type of ammunition they have. So those are the purpose of having these type of equipment that look like military gear is why it's needed. And riot gear is the same thing. Case in point, back here in Chicago last year when they were riding up there, police were getting hit with frozen water bottles. And thank God they had their helmets on and the shields and the shin pads on, the elbow pads, all that stuff on, man. That's for their protection. It's not. And it's also, it's a deterrent too when you see someone dressed up in tactical gear like that. Like, hey, man, I don't want to go messing with them, man. They got a lot of stuff on them that could probably, hurt me, right? To make you think about what you're doing before you go do it. So, I mean, that's my take on it, And some people, I think that's probably the number one thing that I've always heard. It was like, why do they have to, wear so much military gear and look like they're in the military, and having to explain to them and break it down like that. We just did. So yeah, let's talk about this HR 1280, which is the George Floyd Justice.
Justice and Policing Act.
Yeah.
I was looking through a lot of this stuff. A lot of this stuff that's in here, in the Policing Act, is stuff that some departments are already doing. You know what I'm saying? Probably most departments are already doing, prohibits racial profiling, religious and discriminatory profiling. That's one of the first things it says in that act. I'm looking at it now. But of course, that's something that always was expected out of police officers. It's not the profile. Mandates training on racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling for all law enforcement. Now, I'll never say we don't need that training. I'll never say any training that we don't need. I'm all for training. I've always been. Yeah. I come from a department that was very well trained in a lot of different things. So if they want more training on racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling for all law enforcement, okay, I wouldn't have any problems with that as a police officer, would you?
I mean, no, because when you go through academy and you go through training like that, like say, I can speak for my department that I worked in. We're really big on being biased, and we held training every time. Like I said, we go on a special assignment, whatever. We're reading the policy, right? You train, just like we did in the military, right? You train so whenever it comes up, you'll be able to react to it. One of the things that struck out to me, and this was asked to us before, one of our comments was in this bill, it limits qualified immunity as a defense to the liability in a private civil action against a law enforcement officer and grants administrative subpoena power to the Department of Justice in a pattern or practice investigations. I kind of have a problem with the immunity, right? That's now you're going to make it so that the civilians can sue law enforcement personally, right? I kind of have a problem with that because now what that's going to do, that's going to deter law enforcement officers to really doing their job, because now they got to worry about their life while they're out there trying to save a life. They got to worry about being sued personally, right? And they don't make a lot of money as is, so and then something like that happens, it'd probably be hard for them to find an attorney, and then they're going to have to mortgage their house
And
to
there you go. See, that's the same issue I have. I look at it's got pros and cons to it. Okay, now I'm gonna start with the pro in a sense of bad cops. If you got bad cops out there that are really doing stuff continually, breaking the department policy, being physically abusive with their suspects, really causing havoc out there, then something like that for them would apply and maybe would deter a bad officer from being a bad officer. You see what I'm saying? However, what you're going to encompass in all that is what you just said, Corey. It's all the good officers now that have to change how they view what they're doing. Think of it this way: you go to your job as a police officer. Your shift is 10 hours every day. You don't know what you're about to get into, or you might get into 10 different things that shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would that feel if every call I go to, I'm basically putting my family on the line, my family's welfare on the line. Like you said, I might have to put my house up to hire an attorney or something like that. Have to wrestle with somebody on the ground where I'm laying on top of them, and then because they're high on drugs or something, and like we see often too many times where we finish with the suspect and they get in the back of the ambulance, and then when they get to the hospital and they die, and they say, well, I'm partly to blame for why they died because I restrained him on the ground because he was fighting with me. You see what I'm saying? Well, yeah. Somebody could come back and sue me for that. Everything you do as an officer now, when you take qualified immunity, that officer has to think in his mind, I'm putting my family at risk here. Every call for service, I'm putting my family at risk here. Now, what officer wants to do that? Who would want to do that job as a police officer if you're going to be putting your family at risk on every possible contact you come in contact with?
Mm-hmm.
Every person you come in contact with. I wouldn't want to do that. Right. I don't think I would do this job if there were no qualified immunity, because you are taking necessary protections away from all the good officers, which outweigh any protection for the bad officer, because you got 50, 80, 90 times more good officers then you have bad cops. I strongly believe that, right?
Right.
That's the bad part that I see. It's going to affect good cops probably more than bad cops.
Yeah. Who's going to want to do the job with that? Right. I mean,
Exactly.
you got to worry about that every single day you put that uniform on. Right. Now, keep in mind, this isn't law yet. It just passed the House. It still has to go to the Senate. So it's not official yet, but these are some of the things that are in that bill. If you hadn't seen the bill yet, all you got to do is go to, the U.S. Congress, or just Google, go to congress.gov. And it's the HR 128 George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2021. We'll put the link down below so you can pull it up and check it out for yourselves and familiarize with yourself. But you got to think about what type of impact this is going to have on your community when they try to put these new police policies into effect, right? I want to know, when I had that uniform on, it was important to me that I had the backing of the department. And I know myself, and I know you, Mike. I know we always did things within accordance with the department policies and with all the local and state laws. You're going to go out here and do your job, but I don't want my officers out here having to second guess themselves every day, right? And these new regulations they're trying to impose, I believe is going to, and it's just my opinion, is going to cause officers to second guess themselves. And when they get into a situation and they have to make a decision, that's not one of the decisions I want them to have to make. Oh, I better not do this because I'm gonna get sued, right?
Let me make it clarify. Police departments get sued all the time. So
true. Yeah.
They get sued all the time. But when you take qualified immunity away, the way I understand it in this bill is it more focuses on the individual officer. And that's almost like, it's like going through life without having any car insurance, or going through life without having any medical insurance. Something might happen to you beyond your control that you might have to get medical help for, right? You ain't got no insurance, you're gonna be ass out.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're gonna be feeling that. And that's in a sense, that's what this seems like to me. It's when you take qualified immunity away, you're taking your insurance away from something happening beyond your control, or something that you feel you had to do, right? But now you got to second guess yourself because somebody died. You see what I'm saying? Or somebody died because of something else, but you contributed to it because you happened to be wrestling with them on the ground that night before, or whatever. Right. That's the thing. It's tough.
That's a good point, because now, and I think back, the altercations I got into on the side of the road, and like, well, daggone, now I would be more lenient to not trying to, apprehend this guy. Screw it, just let you go. Instead of doing my job and detaining him like I did, we end up getting a fight. Now I'm thinking, like, well, under these conditions here, this guy could have sued me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even though I was justified in everything that I have done, but the fact of the matter is, he could have still pushed the issue and still sued me. Then, I think now, like, daggone, I just drug my whole family through this, legal process for, a couple years. I mean, it could last 2-3 years going through, the process and all these legalities and everything like that you got to go through to not get convicted of something that only thing you're doing is just doing your job. Now, we understand there are officers out here that do unnecessary things and violate policy and things like that. And obviously, yes, they need to be dealt with. But if that is the case, then if they want to go after them in a civil matter, then that's on them. Once they have been determined to have been at fault, then so be it. But then if not, I mean, I just have a real problem with that. My main thing is officer safety. Make sure these men and women that are out there doing the job stay safe. So hey, like, share, and subscribe to our channel if you like the content of this video. I asked a question earlier. If you didn't see it up there on the board, the bottom of your screen there, what does police reform look like to you? Leave us a comment below. We'd like to hear your ideas of the way you would like to see, or the direction of policing you would like to see the direction of policing to go. We thank you for your time. We love y'all. I'll leave a link below to the HR 128, the George Floyd bill, and so you can all check it out and get familiar with it, because again, these things are going to affect you in your communities with the lack of policing because of this whole defunding the police. So we hope this was knowledgeable. You learned something about, or at least our take on defunding police from two former law enforcement officers and two brothers who live in the communities with you that have to deal with these type of issues too. So policing is important to us. Without any further ado, Mike, you got anything else?
No, I appreciate you guys watching us and checking out our channel. Something for us to do,
Yep.
you know, and don't forget hit that like and subscribe button.
Yep. All right. We'll see y'all next week when we put out another video. In the meantime, y'all be blessed, be safe. Peace.
All right. Stop.